During my research, I came across an interesting skeptic, Piers Corbyn, astrophysicist and meteorologist. He investigates the influence of the sun on global temperatures. His long-range weather forecastings are quite impressive. Piers is the oldest brother of Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the British Labour Party.
All the actual observable evidence shows that it is CO2 which is an effect, not a cause of climate. CO2 levels depend on the surface temperature of the sea, because there's a dynamic equilibrium between the CO2 dissolved in the sea and in the air. And there's 50 times more CO2 in the sea than there is in the atmosphere. So that is how it actually works, and the data shows that. And there is a lag of CO2 following temperatures on a world scale of some hundreds of years, and that this has been going on for millions of years.
How do you sell that the CO2 is rising at this time?
Yeah, probably because of the medieval warm period about 800 years ago, and there's a lag effect on the warming and the CO2 coming off from the sea because of the complicated undersea currents, which actually takes hundreds of years to circulate around the globe. So man's CO2 isn't going to increase anything. It'll just, whatever the natural process is going on, which is much, much bigger than man, will decide. But man's CO2 is only 4% of the total CO2 flux in and out of the ocean. Take Big Ben Tower. If that was representing the atmosphere, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is like an inch or so, or 2 or 3 centimetres on the top. And man's contribution to that is like a little blob of bird shit on the top of that. And we're told to believe that is causing climate change. It's complete delusional nonsense, because it requires a conspiracy of nature for the natural processes to follow man. Now, there's 10 times more CO2 produced by termites than there is by man. So for CO2 to follow man, then the termites have to do, somehow follow man's CO2, which of course is insane. It's a conspiracy of nature of the most insane proportions. I mean, yet this is what is propagated by the powers that be.
What are you seeing?
We see, and we're very confident of it because our own prognoses have been borne out, we see a general cooling, continuing general cooling, to about 2035, when there'll be some very extreme cold winters. There'll be some short hot spells as well, but basically overall much colder. Mini ice ages.
But I see ice caps melting and crumbling in huge blocks into the sea.
In the ocean, look, and the polars are melting.
Yeah, but of course it's a nonsense, isn't it? That's always been the case for millions of years. Look, snow falls on the Arctic and Antarctic, spreads outwards and breaks off as ice. It's just like if you take a film of a tree blowing over, you say, my goodness me, look, that tree's 100 years old. This must be the strongest winds for 100 years. Well, of course it's nonsense. It's an old tree and it dies. The ice that breaks off all these ice shelves is typically 4,000 years old. But it's 4,000 years old irrespective of what's happening today. It's just slow flowing of ice.
I see graphs on TV that temperature is rising.
Yeah, well, those graphs are fraud. What they've done is they have chosen successive data sets and reduced the data sources in order to show or pretend the past is colder and the present is warmer. Now, in successive years, they produce different data sets given by these other graphs. So the most recent one is this red one here, which has got the minimum. They've made the past colder and the present, they made it warmer. So the rise in the 2001 data is this, and the rise since 1975 in their so-called better data is this. But they just consistently choose data sets in order to make the past look colder and the present look warmer. The difference between these two is 0.5 degree. So So my way of thinking, there's half a degree of fraud. They don't deny it. They just say, oh, we've now got better measurements. Well, this is how to lie to politicians. Yes, Minister, of course, this is the best available data, which will enable you to lie, Minister, to Parliament. So the actual effect of that is basically half a degree of bogus warming. So if you take half a degree off current world temperatures, then you're going back to the same temperatures as were in the early 40s.
Imagine that your theory is false.
Mm-hmm.
And there is CO2 and we need to combat the climate. The main question is that überhaupt possible to fight climate, stabilize climate as we are trying to do it today?
Well, no. Adding or removing CO2 will have no effect. If you remove CO2, more CO2 will come off the sea. And if you add extra CO2, it'll just go into the sea. So all those things are complete delusional nonsense. If you do want to try and change climate, I would say it's pretty difficult, because you're going to have to change solar activity or prevent particles coming from the sun, which can't be done. You can use an umbrella when it rains, so that's quite effective. Well, small farms are pretty inefficient things. I mean, actually, you do need to have big farming to be more efficient. But I suppose for multinationals, there's cheaper ways of growing food abroad. So, you know, if they can make more profits by shunting food all over the world, they will do. And they're perfectly happy to reduce farmers to, as you say, watching wind farms and be subsidised by other workers in order to build these completely stupid things. But overall, it's part of a de-industrialisation plan for the West, because super profits can be made by workers in India, Turkey and China making machinery. So in the case of how the European Union operates, you can see that Wall Street interests are fully behind the European Union, which is a mechanism actually to deindustrialise the West. And you can see how it happened in Teesside, North East England. Energy prices are so high that the production of steel becomes unprofitable. So they run it down. A company from India then buys up the land and the factory, saying they're going to save it. And they get carbon credits under the European Union emission trading scheme by having run down an industry and reducing less CO2. Then they announce it can't be saved, and then they use those carbon credits in India to build another plant. Even though the MP for the area said, look, those carbon credits were gained by rundown of industry here. We want them to be used to build another industry in Britain. And the European emission trading scheme said no. Those carbon credits are owned by the Indian company, they're going to India. So what happened was we've had taxpayers paying for the destruction of industry in Britain, destruction of jobs in Britain, and the removal of the industry to India, and the production of CO2 has simply been transferred from Britain to India. There's been no reduction in CO2 worldwide, and if that's meant to be saving the planet, it's saved nothing at all. It's just deindustrialised the West and caused more super exploitation of even lower paid workers in India. And you see this type of thing internationally will happen all the time, so long as the multinationals can use man-made climate change and as an ideological weapon to justify super profits. Well, the modern left partly lost its way when the Berlin Wall came down and turned from a sort of straightforward socialist ideology to something like red and green mixture, you see, and developed things like eco-socialism, whatever that means. And of course this made them ideal prey for the climate change ideology, which is completely generated by the international big business interests. We all want to do something good, you know, and saving the planet is good. So I say, look, okay, saving the planet is good, but let's say all these trees and so on, we should defend them for their own sake. We defend biodiversity for its own sake. Do not tie this to a story about CO2 which may be untrue. But this is the main problem. So you have a sort of flag following left where people justify what they believe in, but in terms of who else believes it. So when I come up with stuff about climate change, they say, oh yeah, but George Bush agrees with you. How does it feel agreeing with George Bush? I mean, you must be wrong. You know, well, this is silly. I say, well, look, if George Bush walks in the room and tells you it's Tuesday, I suppose you say it must be Wednesday then, do you? I mean, yeah. You've got to look at the facts and the evidence to decide anything. And who else believes it or not is nothing whatsoever to do with what is true. But the point is that the public are misled all the time, and anything with a green label on is used to sell anything that the powers that be want. Things like wind farms or solar power should be reduced to experimental. I think in maybe 50 years' time, solar power will become very cheap, and that will probably be one of the main sources of energy. But right now, coal is cheapest, followed by oil, and we should use these things.
Does oil have an effect on climate?
No, none effect whatsoever.
Nothing?
Nothing, no. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is plant food. This tree has removed carbon dioxide and turned it into sugar, basically. This is a process that's been going on for millions of years. The coal in the ground was originally in the atmosphere when there was more CO2 in the atmosphere. If you double the amount of CO2, that would be a very good thing, because it would increase the growth rate of plants by about 40%. That would be hugely beneficial to agriculture. But it would be impossible to double CO2, because what happens is it will get absorbed into the sea, because the sea and the air are in balance all the time. I think the truth will come out when the public realise they're being robbed by multinationals in the name of saving the planet. They will say no, and we'll go back to having a rational energy policy.